Who?
It's John Smith and the Cumbermen. They've gone from 19 to 2.
Yes, so I see. J. Smith. Doesn't really help us, does it?
And your friend?
The doctor.
I can't put that down.
John Smith.
Really?
Aye.
Dr. John Smith. And then again he lied. At least I'm almost sure he lied about his friend's name. John Smith, he called him. John Smith, isn't it?
John. John. Oh, yes.
And what's your full name?
Oh, very well. Dr. John Smith.
I don't even know your name.
Smith. Dr. John Smith.
Smith. Dr. John Smith.
Smith.
All right, Tony, he's no elephant. What's your name?
Smith.
Smith? You've got no imagination. Try again, Mr. Smith.
And your name? Smith. Dr. John Smith.
Miss Lavinia Smith, Dr.
Dr. John Smith. How do you do, Miss Smith? Thank you very much indeed, Professor.
Not at all, Smith.
Smith. Yes, of course.
Names!
Sarah Jane Smith.
Dr. John Smith. No relation. I am the director of this establishment.
My name's Smith.
Try not to speak, Mr. Smith.
Somehow I don't think this man's name is Mr. Smith, do you?
You get that feeling?
Dr. John Smith, Ministry of Asteroids.
And you are?
Smith, John Smith.
John Smith. I used to have a friend who sometimes went by that name.
John Smith admitted yesterday with severe abdominal pains.
I promise you, Mr. Smith, we will find a way out.
It's not Smith. That's not my real name.
What is it then, Dr. Smith?
Just the doctor.
Welcome aboard, Miss Jones.
It's my pleasure, Mr. Smith.
Miss Jones, will you accompany me to the theatre?
Mr. Smith, I will. Pardon me, Mr. Smith, you're not dressed yet. I can come back later. Oh, good morning, Mr. Smith.
Your crew's on fine form today, Mr. Smith.
It's your class, Mr. Smith. As you were, Mr. Smith.
If you'll excuse me, Mr. Smith.
You're not John Smith. You're called the Doctor. Mr. Smith, everything I told you, just forget it.
We have a few questions for Mr. Smith.
Make your decision, Mr. Smith. Do it, Mr. Smith. I mean you. Mr. Smith, I think you should escort your lady friend to safety, don't you? Mr. Smith!
Perhaps you did well then, Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, it seems your favorite servant is giving me advice. You will control her, sir.
You will send us Mr. John Smith. Mr. John Smith.
Mr. Smith.
Because the family has travelled far and wide looking for Mr. Smith. And send us Mr. Smith!
Mr. Phillips has been murdered, Mr. Smith.
The man you called John Smith, he was born on another world.
John Smith wouldn't want them to fight. Never mind the doctor. John Smith, I was getting to know.
Mr. Smith, if you please.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith, I have seen many strange sights this night.
I'm John Smith. That's all I want to be, John Smith. With his life. Why can't I be John Smith? Isn't he a good man?
Yes.
The doctor, Mr. Smith.
He made me John Smith.
Where is he? John Smith?
Everything that John Smith is and was, I'm capable of that too.
John Smith is dead, and you look like him.
John Smith, Health and Safety.
Days, registered post.
Safety, don't mind me. Chief Inspector Smith from Scotland Yard, known as the Doctor. John Smith, you're real.
He's lying. Look at his face.
This one's
called John Smith.
Now listen to me.
Come on,
listen to me right now. John Smith.
Mr. Smith was just leaving.
No, I'm just Smith, John Smith.
You won't believe this, Mr. Smith. And you don't blink, Mr. Smith.
Oh, don't blink. Remember that?
It's been a pleasure, Mr. Smith. Merry Christmas, Mr. Smith. You seem familiar, Mr. Smith.
Can I see it?
Mr. Smith, it would be my honor.
She fell in love with this man called John Smith.
Check this out. You might as well call me Smith.
Smith.
John Smith.
Call me Smith. John Smith.
I'm the doctor. Well, other doctor. Or Smith. Or perhaps you think I should stay instead, Mr. Smith.
Dr. and Mrs. Smith. Oh, yes.
I'm the new caretaker, John Smith.
Welcome to call him Mr. Smith. The caretaker, Smith, the doctor.
Never seen him before in my life. Can I help you, Mr. Smith?
This is Mr. Smith, the temporary caretaker, and he's a bit confused.
Danny Pink, here's your man, Mr. Smith.
Yes, John Smith's the name. Most people just call me the Doctor.
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith?
Dr. John Smith.
Dr. John Smith.
Dr. John Smith.
Dr. John Smith. Dr. John Smith. Dr. John Smith.
Dr. John Smith.
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 John Smith. John Smith.
John Smith. John Smith. John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith.
Days registered per...
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith. John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith. Yes, John Smith's the name.
Who? It's John Smith and the Cumbermen. They've gone from 19 to 2.
Dr.
John Smith.